Do you think you know the limits of human behavior? Think again. Today, we're peeling back the layers of history to reveal individuals so strange, so unsettling, that you'll question what you thought you knew about the human psyche. From a dollmaker with a sinister secret to a Hungarian countess obsessed with eternal youth and an alchemist whose ambitions defied both ethics and nature, these are stories that will haunt your imagination. Welcome back to Two Tricks, One Treat, the channel where we probe the enigmatic, the eerie, and the downright baffling. As per usual, two of our stories today are pure invention, while one is anchored in unsettling truth. After you find out which tale is based in reality, we'd love to hear if you guessed it right, so leave us a comment below. If you're new to our channel or haven't yet subscribed, make sure to click that subscribe button so you never miss our daily explorations into the mysterious and unexplained. Now, let's begin. Story 1, The Dollmaker. In the struggling town of Ashford, Kentucky, a place plagued by crime and poverty, the year 2017 was particularly grim. The town had a notorious reputation for unsolved disappearances, assumed by many to be runaways or victims of the rampant crime. Kathy, an ambitious local journalist trying to start her own news business, had been covering various stories around town. She interviewed business owners, reported on local events, and tried to shed light on the darker aspects of Ashford. Always on the lookout for an interesting story, Kathy decided to feature local businesses in a segment she was working on. That's how she found herself in Thorne's Curiosities, a peculiar shop owned by Elijah Thorne. Elijah was an older man, his face lined with wrinkles and his eyes a dull gray. He had lived in Ashford all his life and mostly kept to himself. Kathy started the interview by asking Elijah how long he had been in business, what kinds of items he sold, and what inspired him to open the shop. As she spoke with Elijah, Kathy felt both intrigued and uneasy. The dolls in the shop were creepy and gave Kathy the chills. It felt like you were being watched from every angle of the store. While Elijah was concluding the tour of his shop, Kathy's eyes were drawn to the dolls displayed behind the counter. These dolls seemed a bit higher quality than the rest, and one particular doll stood out. It bore an uncanny resemblance to her friend Sam, who had disappeared 2 years ago. When she asked Elijah about the dolls behind the counter, he said they were not for sale and personal dolls he put extra effort into. When she asked to see one, he hesitantly declined and told her that he wasn't feeling well and they should end the interview. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Kathy returned a few days later. She wore a baseball hat, sunglasses, and a large jacket to disguise herself. While Elijah was busy with another customer, she seized the opportunity to sneak behind the counter and grab the doll that looked like Sam. Without Elijah noticing, she quickly walked out of the store and went home with the doll. Once home, she examined the doll closely. As she looked it over, a cold, sinking feeling filled her stomach. The day Sam disappeared, she had come over to Kathy's house to show her hair. She had just got it dyed, and the stylist did an awful job, resulting with Sam having a weird strawberry blonde color she did not want. Kathy pulled out her phone, opened her gallery to the picture she took of Sam's hair, and held the doll's hair against the phone. It was a match. Kathy immediately went to the authorities, who arrested Elijah Thorne. Upon investigation, it was discovered that Elijah had been kidnapping people who visited his store for the last 30 years. Once he picked a victim, he would ask them to come back later at closing, as he had to fix something about the doll they purchased. As a sick memento, he used their hair to craft lifelike dolls. Elijah was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He also became the main suspect in at least 8 other missing persons cases, all linked to the dolls found in his shop with matching hair. The town of Ashford was left to grapple with the horrifying reality, forever haunted by the twisted tale of Elijah Thorne, the Dollmaker. Story 2, The Blood Countess. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the hills of Hungary were steeped in legend and dark tales. Among the various nobles and figures who loomed large over these narratives, none cast a longer shadow than Countess Elizabeth Bathory, a woman whose life is so cloaked in myth and terror that it's hard to separate fact from folklore. Born into one of the most powerful families in Hungary in 1560, Elizabeth was a woman of great intellect and education. She spoke multiple languages and was groomed from a young age to marry well, which she did. Her husband was Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a powerful man in his own right, and a warrior who spent much of his time on the battlefield fighting the Ottomans. This left Elizabeth alone, often for months on end, managing their extensive estates. While Count Nadasdy was away, whispers began to circulate among the villagers and servants. Young girls who had gone to work at the castle were disappearing. Stories spread of eerie cries echoing through the stone walls at night. Still, the Countess was above suspicion. She was a noblewoman, beyond reproach. Elizabeth's life took a turn for the worse when her husband died in 1604. Alone and consumed by a vanity and a fear of aging, she became obsessed with maintaining her youthful appearance. Rumors grew darker, more horrifying. It was said that she had started bathing in the blood of young girls, believing it would keep her young. The tales could no longer be ignored when Lutheran minister Andras Ketty began investigating. After collecting countless testimonies from villagers and surviving servants, the authorities were compelled to act. In December of 1610, King Matthias II ordered her arrest. When the soldiers arrived at her castle, they were unprepared for the horror they discovered. While accounts vary, it's agreed that signs of torture and imprisonment were evident. Elizabeth and some of her servants were immediately arrested. However, given her noble status, she was never formally tried in a court of law. Imprisoned in her own castle, Elizabeth was sealed in a set of rooms, with only small slits left open for food and air. There, in utter isolation, she lived the last 4 years of her life, scribbling letters proclaiming her innocence until she was found dead in 1614. Even after her death, the legend of the Blood Countess grew. She was said to have killed as many as 650 girls. Although concrete evidence for such a staggering number has never been found, Elizabeth Bathory became the stuff of horror stories, her life serving as an unsettling tale of what can happen when absolute power is wedded to the darkest obsession. To this day, the legacy of Elizabeth Bathory exists in a murky realm between history and horror story. Was she a sadistic murderer or the victim of a political witch hunt? Perhaps we will never know. What we do know is that her story has captivated and horrified people for over 4 centuries, making her one of the most enduring and terrifying figures in European history. Story 3: The Alchemist's Wife. Margaret had always been fascinated by her husband Albert's work. A renowned alchemist, he spent hours secluded in his basement laboratory, conducting experiments that he claimed would change the world. They were married in 1831 and have been together for 17 years. Albert loved chemistry and always energetically spoke about his work over dinner. However, as the years passed, Albert grew increasingly secretive, and Margaret began to suspect that his experiments were far from noble. Initially, it was the strange deliveries that piqued her curiosity. Late at night, horse-drawn carriages would pull up to their estate, delivering crates marked with symbols she couldn't recognize. Albert would hurriedly move them to his laboratory, warning her not to ask questions. Then there were the unsettling noises, strange, guttural sounds that echoed from the basement in the dead of night. When she questioned Albert, he dismissed her concerns, attributing the sounds to side effects of his experiments. Unable to contain her curiosity and concern any longer, Margaret decided to investigate. One night she waited until Albert was engrossed in his work, then used the spare key he didn't know she had to cautiously enter the forbidden laboratory. The room was filled with the acrid smell of chemicals. Tables were cluttered with glass vials, burners, and arcane instruments, but what caught her eye was a table covered with a cloth. Pulling it back, she discovered the lifeless body of a man, his features distorted in a grimace of pain. Horrified, Margaret stumbled back, knocking over a shelf of glass vials. The noise alerted Albert, who rushed into the room, his face turning from surprise to anger. "Margaret, what have you done? You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same for you," she retorted, her voice trembling. "What is this, Albert? What have you been doing?" Albert sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I've been trying to conquer death, Margaret, to bring the dead back to life." "At what cost, Albert? You're playing God, and it's not right." Realizing the gravity of his actions, Albert looked at the lifeless body, then back at Margaret. "You're right," he said softly. "I've lost my way." However, the story didn't end there. Albert had accumulated significant debts to fund his experiments, debts he couldn't pay. In a desperate attempt to settle his accounts, he had borrowed money from a lender with ties to the church. When he failed to repay, the lender, aware of the nature of Albert's experiments, reported him to the church authorities as leverage. Within days, the church intervened. Furious at Albert's audacity to play God, they arrested him, charging him with heresy and crimes against nature. His laboratory was dismantled and all his research confiscated. Margaret was devastated but not surprised. She attended the trial where Albert was found guilty and excommunicated. He was sentenced to a life of penance, far away from the world of science and alchemy he had once loved. As for Margaret, she couldn't forget what she had seen, but took solace in the fact that her actions had put an end to a dangerous path of discovery. She remained in their estate, converting part of it into a sanctuary for the poor and sick, as a way to atone for the sins committed within its walls. The shadow of Albert's experiments lingered long after, a cautionary tale of the dangers that lurk when one man's quest for knowledge crosses the boundaries of ethics and morality. And so the estate stood as a solemn reminder, its history a blend of ambition, love, and a dark descent into the unknown. So which of these tales sent a shiver down your spine? Was it the Dollmaker from Ashford, Kentucky, the Blood Countess from the hills of Hungary, or the Alchemist's wife? The true story among these is that of the Blood Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Born into Hungarian nobility in 1560, Elizabeth Bathory has been labeled by Guinness World Records as the most prolific female murderer. While the exact number of her victims remains disputed, she is often cited as killing around 650 girls, although this number is likely exaggerated. What is known is that she was accused of torturing and killing young girls and bathing in their blood to maintain her youthful appearance. After an investigation led by Lutheran minister Andras Ketyi, she was arrested in 1610 and subsequently confined to her castle, where she remained bricked in a set of rooms until her death in 1614. She was never formally tried or convicted of her alleged crimes, likely due to her noble status. What the story often leaves out is the political context. Elizabeth Bathory was a widow who owned significant land, making her a target for other nobles who wanted to acquire her property. Some historians argue that she was the victim of a conspiracy, although the testimonies against her were numerous and consistent. Whether a sadistic murderer or a victim of political machinations, her story has inspired countless legends and remains one of the most chilling tales in European history.
Leaving so soon? You wouldn't dare without subscribing and liking the video, right? Would hate to see your hair end up on the Dollmaker's next creation.